At the 25th hour, three men meet inside a building. There's a thunderous noise outside, but there's no storm. The mechanical killers are trying to get in. They require the lifeblood of one of these men. They are Kingmaker, who is too rich, the heraldic lion, Proctor, who is too lucky, the sleek fox, and Foreman, who is too smart, the worried hawk. They meet to decide who should be the next master of Astrobe, the golden city of Astrobe, a future utopia. They debate and present candidates for this next master. They are all two the same. It is remembered that time travel was recently perfected, and that they don't have to select someone who is alive. Why not someone dead? There's a certain mystery about someone who's dead, but the dead of Astrobe will not do. The great Plato is suggested and rejected, for he was a programmed person himself. No matter that he wrote the program. He once wrote that a just man cannot be unhappy, but they want someone who can be unhappy at an unjust situation. A list of historical figures is presented, but they all lack something. They are men who are almost good enough. Foreman has a single name, a single suggestion. Thomas More, because he had one single moment of honesty right at the end, and they can't think of anyone else who ever has. Today, we're talking about a really wonderful science fiction book, Passmaster by R.A.Lafferty. I discovered this book by surprise. I didn't intend to read it. It was not planned in any way, shape, or form. I happened across an interview with Gene Wolfe. I don't remember who the interviewer was, but it was a really wonderful interview, and I am going to provide a link. In this review, which I'm going to talk about for a moment, Gene Wolfe mentions Lafferty, and that's how I found it. And I want to bring up the interview with Gene Wolfe because it was just fascinating in itself. It was a really wonderful peek at his influences and just some things, and I'm going to sort of touch on a couple of them I think was kind of humorous or interesting. I will say, though, that if you decide to go and look at this interview, that you need to know that there are spoilers for the Book of the New Sun and for the Fifth Head of Cerberus. I don't know that it's terrible, but I just need to make sure that you understand that. I feel as though if you read it, you could probably see that they're starting to talk about that book and just skip that paragraph. And I don't think you miss out on very much. What I think was kind of fun, though, is that in there, Gene Wolfe talks about his sort of the conception of Severian in the story and with the outfit. And he said that he would go to like a convention. I want to say it's some sort of science fiction convention. And people were dressing up as characters in their books. And Gene Wolfe's like, nobody will ever dress up. I'm like, how come nobody dresses up like a character out of my stories? And then he thinks, well, I don't really have a dramatic, imposing character to present. And so the costume design of Severian was in part sort of a consideration on Wolfe as like, it's a very stark and dramatic thing, an executioner, right? It's a black cloak and a hood and this, usually probably shirtless or something like that. And then just black pants. It's just a very simple outfit, very easy to pull off. So there was a bit of like the genesis of Severian's look and perhaps even his profession was started as cosplay or an idea for it or something like that. I don't really think it was called cosplay at the time. I don't know. I thought that was really humorous, and I wondered for a second if this was him making a joke out of it, but I don't think that he is. I think it's true. I think that there's some truth. It doesn't mean that the whole series is based on that, but I think that like the genesis of the idea may in part have come from that. In this interview, Wolfe talks about writers that he enjoys, that he likes. And one of the writers that he stops and sort of says, well, I'm reading this person right now and I really like it, was R.A.Lafferty. And I've sort of thought to myself, I stopped and I thought, I don't think I know anything by R.A.Lafferty. So I went to look up Lafferty and I found that there was a audio book version of his novel Passmaster, which is I think his first novel or one of his very first. Most of Lafferty's stuff is out of print, or it's just short story collections. There's a couple short story collections, Passmaster, and I think maybe one or two other novels of all the stuff that he wrote is all that's in print. Most of his stuff is completely out of print, which is a real shame because he's really wonderful. And something that I noticed right away when I started the story, because I just sort of thought, well, I'll just go ahead and, it's not a very long story. I could go ahead and read this tomorrow. I have all this time tomorrow while I'm working. I could just listen to the story and do work. It'd be no big deal. And I did. And something I noticed just right away was how much influence I could see in Gene Wolfe's writing by Lafferty. I could see the way that Gene Wolfe writes was Lafferty-ish. I would almost want to say that I felt like when I read Lafferty that I was reading something Gene Wolfe-ish, but it's the reverse. Or at least I guess so. I don't know if Lafferty was influenced by Wolfe. I don't know. I haven't looked up any to see if there's any talk about that. But most of Lafferty's stuff, I think, came a little bit earlier. There's a definite quality to his writing that I think is really unique. I said that they picked Thomas More. Thomas More is best known for the book published in 1516, Utopia, in which he presents the idea of a utopia, which is pretty important in the world of science fiction, and very important in the book of Pastmaster. Now, something else to know about More is that he was the Lord Chancellor for Henry VIII, and resigned his position because of Henry VIII's divorcing of his wife and taking up a new wife and forming the Protestant church. And in fact, More was executed in 1536 for treason, although the testimony about his treason absolutely feels false. It's said that More's last words before being beheaded were, "I die the king's good servant and God's first." And so these three men decide to find someone to go to Earth and go back in time and collect Thomas More. So Foreman picks Paul, a criminal on the run from the mechanical killers, to go back to Earth, to go back in time and collect Thomas More, to convince him to come and be the master of Astrobe, a future utopia. Paul has to use like hop equation space to get from Astrobe to Earth, because the normal travel would take 5 years. But with using hop equation space travel on a ship, you can make that trip in a month. But the pilot of the hop equation ship would sleep. So some interesting things, because when you make this travel, you still dream. You dream 90-second long dreams, and you have 20,000 of them. It's said that people who are sane generally cannot pilot hop equation ships. They can't do hop equation because it drives them crazy, but that people who aren't quite sane don't have much of an issue with it. And there's also a sense that there are things that live in hop equations, like that there's dreams that everyone shares who does a hop equation trip, that there's this sort of like things or thoughts or psychic impressions that all the stuff that's ever happened is in this hop equation space, and that it can impress itself upon your mind. What's crazy about that is that this is presented. There's another thing too, that this is presented, and then it's sort of doesn't really talked about too much, although it is somewhat used, because there's a bit of like precognition that happens, sort of like a deja vu, I guess you could say, that sort of happens from these dreams, where Paul has visions and dreams that later on showcase themselves in the novel. But you're not really sure the significance of them or what these people are saying when you read it. So I think it's really fascinating. It's very Wolfish, right? For you to get information too early. And then on a reread, you can sort of say, "Oh, I see what's going on. Oh, I understand now." Right? It's very much a characteristic of Gene Wolfe's writing, and I can see that that's a heavy element in Pastmaster. The other interesting thing about hop equations is that there's a great swap that happens, and it's interesting how Lafferty dances around the language a little bit on purpose. But essentially, your gender is swapped when you go through hop equation space. Not really sure why, but it happens. This is important in a sense because the characters absolutely do talk about it. They say, "Oh, this and this." Like it says that Paul does sing soprano or something like that when he makes a hop equation trip. But then it undoes it when you go back, or the next trip, I guess. I'm not really sure if it's the next trip or if you have to go directly back. I don't know. Well, that's something that happens. But the hop equation just gets Paul to Earth. It doesn't get him back in time. There's a device that lets you go back in time. He's like, "Oh yeah, I want to go back in time." They're like, "Okay, you got money?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, see you later." That's it. That is the discussion about time travel. And he goes back and he goes to Thomas More, and this is where it's crazy. He says, "Thomas More, I'm from the future. I'm from Astrobe. We want you to come to the future with us and be our new master. We want you to be the past master. That's how we're going to bill it. And Thomas More says, oh, not another one of you guys. He says, I get this all the time. And he's like, what do you mean? He goes, I know all about Astrobe and this city and this utopia. He says, it seems pretty interesting. What do I want to do that for? Well, Paul is able to convince Thomas More to come to Astrobe. He's able to present a convincing argument. So Thomas More agrees. And they travel forward in time just as easily as Paul traveled back in time. And then they travel to Astrobe with More. Paul and More. Now, here's an interesting thing. Now, Paul's gender is going to be swapped back, but that means that Thomas More's gender for the entire remainder of the novel is reversed. But it's only like casually brought up one time. It's absolutely a very prominent thing that's noted by Lafferty, but he doesn't talk about it very much after he tells you once. And there's definitely a sense in this novel that he'll tell you something one time, he'll tell you it very clearly, and he'll not bring it up again. And so it is sort of a thing where you have to kind of like think about what just happened. Like, wait a minute, isn't he? Oh, yeah, that seems interesting. Okay, weird. I don't know that that's super critical to the plot, but I think that those little touches are just all over inside this book. And I think also that it's not too surprising that we're talking about Thomas More, the writer of Utopia, going forward into the future to become the new master, the past master, as it were, of Astrobe, that there's not something going on there, and that this book is just rife with symbolism. We shouldn't be too surprised that since Thomas More himself is a saint, he was canonized because of his standing up for the Catholic Church against the Protestant Church and Henry VIII. So he's a patron saint. We shouldn't be too surprised that there's probably some significance in somebody named Paul going to get him, right? Paul, or Saul, who was Paul, right? The persecutor of Christians who was traveling and was struck down by a blinding light and changed his faith, changed his belief. He accepted Jesus and Christianity and became a great proselytizer of Christianity. There's absolutely some stuff going on there. And Lafferty is sort of known to be a devout Catholic, and that influences his writing. This Gene Wolfe is too, by the way, if you didn't know that. I don't know that that's necessarily a reason to like him or even dislike him, because I don't feel that there's any energy, any sort of crusading going on or anything like that. There's none of that. But I think that just shows the kind of symbology that Lafferty uses, right? There's a lot of religious symbolism in this book, a lot. I don't want to go into it too far because I don't want to take it away from anybody. But I think that if you just know that there's some stuff going on there, that you should be able to pick up on some other things. And it's such a well-written story. And it's really, really intelligent and tight. And it definitely, it has a weird sense that I am finding a difficult time sort of trying to articulate. It feels like at times you as the reader are more invested in what's going on in the scene than the characters who are in the scene or the narrator. Right? That opening scene where the three masters, these men who will decide who shall be the new master of Astrobe, right? They're part of a council that decides who the new master will be. These important big men in physique and in importance and in wealth. These men are in a building that is being stormed by mechanical killers machines designed to eliminate any threat to the Astrobe dream. And one of these men is a threat to the Astrobe dream. These men in this building, with these machines, these mechanical killers are trying to get them, are completely disinterested in the whole thing. The men are radioing in, dying, screams are coming in the background, things are exploding, these things are bursting through and they're eliminated. And they keep talking about, who do we want to vote for the next president? It's nuts. But it seems right, though. It seems that these men maybe would be like that. But there's definitely a sense when you read this that you as a reader are having a different reaction, or your reaction is right and correct. It just doesn't seem to fit in with what the characters or the narrator are doing. It does seem strange. And there's a strange detachment that produces a unique effect that I find multiple times in the book. That also felt wolfish to me. I've seen that in other places, and Wolfe is the one who comes to mind the most when I think of it. Really a wonderful book. If you like Gene Wolfe, I think you probably, I mean, he liked this, and his writing takes, I wouldn't say it takes a page out of it, but I can see that there's an influence of Lafferty's writing on Gene Wolfe's writing. I think that you'd like this story. I will say that it is not as grandiosely science fiction. It is not, even though it has mechanical killers, it never seems like the attention is on those things. I don't know. I hesitate. I guess I'll say spoiler, to some extent, because I do kind of want to say a couple other things, and I feel like I really can't talk about them unless I just kind of like have to say spoiler first. So spoiler, I don't know, give me a minute or two. This story is absolutely a retelling of a Christ story. Moore is a Christ-like figure. There is even a sort of Last Supper where someone says, oh, somebody in your party is going to betray you, by the way. Right? That literally happens. And there literally is a betrayal. And then there's a sort of like this, I don't know, the execution, right? This sort of the crucifixion. It's the same thing. The same sort of, and a denial at the crucifixion. These sorts of things kind of happen. Made for a really pleasurable read, really interesting read. Definitely the kind of book you could go back and read again. I can't recommend Pastmaster enough. There's probably some other stuff to talk about that. Let me see. Thomas More's Utopia presents an idealized city, cities, an idealized society where there is no one in charge. Utopia is a satire, but only to some extent. And that's what's interesting about it, is that it could be read both as a straight book and as satire, and it kind of works in both ways. Probably it's a little bit, it's some of both. It's about half and half. This is what an idealized society could await a path to it, but also it's, even Thomas More, who is in his own story, Utopia, says that this is ludicrous and it wouldn't work. But I don't know how much that is just sort of, giving himself an out, in a sense, right? Because some of the stuff he presents is sort of like getting rid of royalty and things like that, right? Nobody's in charge. There's no personal property. Nobody owns land. You can go into, there are no closed doors. You can go into any area in a city in Utopia without restriction. And Thomas More, the character in Lafferty's book, even says, I wrote this thing as satire. I can't, I would like to see what you guys did with my satire, which I think is which is fun. That's a fun moment. It's a fun idea to think about this character, this real person who wrote a story, getting to look at the fruition, the sort of actualization of his ideas, and to see how they played out. But of course, I think anybody who's read any science fiction knows that all utopias are dystopias, right? There is no such thing as a utopia. There's only dystopias. And that's what Astrobe is. It's a dystopia. And it has a slum cathead. And when he comes back to Astrobe, golden Astrobe has a golden light about it, right? When he comes back, they are somewhat tricked and they end up in Cathead. And Moore says, we have to get these people out of Cathead. It's a horrible place. And Paul tells him, all these people are here by choice. They could, within the hour, be in Astrobe and be taken care of medically, given food, given a place to live, and be well cared for, just as any other citizen of Astrobe is. They insist on staying here. And that idea pervades the book, that you have this utopia that people are rejecting. And that's why they've brought Thomas More here. And just as in Utopia, there are no closed doors, no one's mind is allowed to be closed in Astrobe. Your mind is public property. Anyone can come in and interject thoughts into your own mind. Thomas More will say, that wasn't me, somebody else said that. And that's how the mechanical killers come after people. They sense someone's thoughts. They read someone's thoughts as being against the Astrobe dream, and they seek to punish and execute them. I really think that Pastmaster is worth your time. It's available for free on Audible if you have like a subscription or whatever. I know that there's a ebook version, and I know that it is actually reprinted. You can get a paperback copy. You don't have to get you don't have to go and get one used. I will say a lot of Lafferty's catalog is out of print, and if you find a copy, it gets to be a little expensive, which is frustrating because I'd like to read some of his novels, and don't exactly want to pay collector's prices. So I don't know. I'll keep looking. I mean, there's some stuff out there. It's also not a lot of information about this writing. There just isn't much. It's like you can look at a Wikipedia page and you can see a title of a book, and I don't know, that's about it. So definitely an interesting experiment to sort of see which of these Lafferty books is worth my time. I don't know that I've ever encountered a Lafferty book in the wild per se, but I guess I never really was looking for him as a writer. I definitely will do that in the future. Now, a couple things about Lafferty himself. He never married, and so when he passed, he had no descendants to pass his estate onto, to pass on his works. And so they went up for public sale. And Locus magazine, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction that talks a lot about like science fiction news, purchased the rights, I think at the urging or with the efforts of Neil Gaiman, which felt really good about that when I read that. I thought, wow, what a great thing, because otherwise this sort of stuff would have gotten cut up or used, or who knows what would have happened to it. But it's great that it was to be preserved by really a great organization and by a person who I intrinsically seem to trust. Neil Gaiman keeps good company, right? You know, I mean, he was friends with Gene Wolfe, he was friends with Harlan Ellison, some other writers I can't think of offhand, but writers that I really like and respected, and Neil Gaiman was friends with them, and also a great writer in his own regard. So I feel good that Neil Gaiman was able to have a hand in preserving Lafferty's work. And I think that that's part of what's going on with this, why this is available for free on Audible. So if you have a subscription, it's totally worth it. I don't think that the paperback copy is very expensive. This interview with Gene Wolfe, and that got me to find R.A.Lafferty and read Pastmaster, and that got me interested in learning more about Thomas More and Utopia. And I think it was a really rewarding rabbit hole to fall down. So yeah, very unexpected. It was not the direction I went. I thought, I got to read this next. I thought, well, you know, I got a little time. I could read this. Maybe this would be interesting. And it was. So R.A.Lafferty's Pastmaster. I'll just leave you with a really wonderful quote by one of the characters about Astrobe, where they said, "Golden Astrobe, it blows out souls like rows of candles." Thank you very much. My name is Virgil, and this is Literally Books. If you enjoyed anything that I've done here, a like is well appreciated. And if you're not subscribed, I'd appreciate that as well if you want to see more of this. That's all for now. Bye.